Hi folks, welcome to another edition of Government Matters. My name is Mike Dobbs, and with me is State Senator Eric Lesser. You folks probably understand that the senator is ending his time in the Senate representing Western Massachusetts, and we wanted to do an exit interview, for lack of a better term. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike.
So, I don't want this necessarily to be a trip down nostalgia lane here for you, but on the other hand,
we do have a lot of good memories together.
That's true. But the bottom line is that you have really distinguished yourself by sticking to several core issues over the time of your tenure in the Senate. I mean, some elected officials tend to be reactive. Some are proactive, and I would have put you in the proactive lane because there were certain things that very early on you glommed onto and you really wanted to pursue them. And before we talk about East-West Rail, let me talk about the senator was also very much involved in terms of the tourism industry, which for Western Massachusetts is one of our key parts of our economic foundation. So let's start there. Have you seen significant increases in tourism? Have you seen improvements? And granted, the pandemic was horrible for the tourism industry, and in fact, that industry is having to play catch-up ball now. Yeah. So what do you see in terms of, you know, what it was then and what it is now, and what some of the challenges they have?
Well, thanks, Mike. I mean, first, thanks for the opportunity, and I want to acknowledge your big news and your big career shift and your retirement as well. It's an incredible career that you've had and will continue to have. But I just, on a personal level, Mike, want to say how much I admire you and how much I've enjoyed these kibitzing sessions we've had over the years. So.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. So on the topic of tourism, I mean, just stepping back, when I started 8 years ago, there was no Dr. Seuss Museum. There was no MGM. Obviously, it was pre-COVID, and there was a different dynamic. It was before the announced major renovation of the Hall of Fame, and it was really a different time. We really had to make a case very proactively about why Western Mass and why the Pioneer Valley in particular was a great place to host events, host conferences, bring in visitors. And I think it's become easier for us to make that argument now, and I think it's become more socialized, frankly, that this sector and this industry is really important. Part of the reason why I think it's important is tourism can't be outsourced. It can't be moved, right? It's inherent to the assets you have in your community. It tends to favor and support small businesses more than other sectors, restaurants, gas stations, souvenir shops, the service economy all around. It also tends to be a sector that could support people from a variety of education and income and skill levels. And so as a result of that, I think it's a really important industry for us to continue to nurture and to continue to support. The other thing I would say is a dollar spent on tourism locally, it tends to have a circulating effect in the economy because again, if you're a visitor from out of town and you are going to the Dr. Seuss Museum and you're having dinner at Nadim's, you know, that money is staying local because they're using it to pay their workers who also live here, who are using it to pay rent that, is hopefully going to a property owner who lives locally, and on and on and on. So it's a really important sector for us. And I think we need to do more. And something I'd love to see in the coming years is even more investment and focus on the tourism sector and attracting more visitors to Western Mass. And by the way, the Thunderbirds, another huge achievement. Nathan Costa and Paul Picknelli and the whole team behind the Thunderbirds. That wasn't here when I started 8 years ago. So there's been a lot of really, really great momentum and progress since I've been in office.
So you see that we still need to do a lot more then?
Yeah, because I do think we have untapped potential. I think, frankly, the convention center could be booked a lot more. Certainly the Thunderbirds are putting it to good use, and there have been more concerts than there were in the past. But there's still a lot of dark nights, and there's a lot more that could be done. I'd love to see our hotel occupancy rates go up even more and have a higher percentage there. I'd love to see us better utilize and integrate some of the different attractions. You've got Yankee Candle, you've got the Hall of Fame, you've got the Springfield Museums, you've got the Big E, you've got Six Flags. You have all these great natural attractions all around us, Mount Tom and all these other great sites. And I think we could do even more around kind of integrating the marketing and supporting more robust marketing efforts. We've got 30 million people that live within a 4-hour drive of Springfield, Massachusetts. So, even small fractional improvements in those retention rates or attraction rates could mean hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in revenue for Western Mass.
So during your time in the Senate, speaking of MGM, you were involved with all of the discussion about casino gaming. Do you feel comfortable with what has come out of it, looking at MGM and Encore and Plainridge? As a member of the legislature who was involved, do you think it's been successful? Are you pleased with it?
Well, the casino gaming law was passed before I came into office, so I was less involved with the kind of decision of whether or not to have casino gaming in Massachusetts. Something I was very involved with was the decision to legalize sports betting.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment.
I do think that when all is said and done, people are going to be very happy with the law Massachusetts passed. As we speak, the Gaming Commission is putting the finishing touches on the rollout of the final ecosystem, so to speak, and the licenses to allow people to get up and get started. But I think the law we passed is going to create a really strong product and a really good experience for residents of Massachusetts, and that was really the goal. And so I do think it was the right thing to do. And the bottom line is all the states around us have it. Connecticut has it, Rhode Island has it, New Hampshire has it, New York has it. So we needed to stay competitive. We needed to stay somewhat synchronized with those other states. And I think the law we passed does that.
I always find it very interesting that a state that had blue laws where you couldn't buy a comic book on a Sunday has so openly embraced something like casino gaming and now sports gaming.
You're seeing this across the board with, quote unquote vice laws, right? I mean, you're seeing, obviously marijuana is a very high profile example, now fully legal in Massachusetts, has been now for a while. That also happened over the 8 years that I've been in office. You, of course, saw you first legalized resort-style gaming and now legalized sports betting. And we even have now an open debate about happy hour, which may come back in Massachusetts. So, yeah, I do think the era of those types of vice or moral crime, so to speak, for lack of a better way of putting it, are increasingly in the past, and people are now thinking in terms of, well, if you legalize it, you bring it into daylight, you tax it, you regulate it, you actually get a safer and more open and healthier economy and system as a result.
Also, we can't be the state that doesn't have certain things if all our neighboring states, since so much of our economy is a regional economy, it's just like people driving from Connecticut here to get gasoline, for instance, because of the different tax structures. I mean, there's a lot of interplay between states, the state's residents.
Exactly, and just to zoom out for a second, that's across the board, and I think where this might be playing out in the coming years in the most profound way is around workers and broader economic trends. If you have an economy where somebody can open up their laptop and work from anywhere, yes, they could work from home, or they could work from a co-working space, or they could work from a traditional office, but they could also work from Texas or from Florida or from somewhere with a lower tax or lower cost environment, and we have to be mindful of that because people are more mobile now than ever before. I live about 7 or 8 minutes from the Connecticut border. We border 5 states that are all a pretty short drive from us. We're an easy plane ride from a whole lot more, and we now have a way of working that allows people to be completely integrated into the economy in some cases 100% remote way. This is something I think policymakers, the legislature, others are really going to have to be thinking about, in the next 2, 5, 10 years? How do we stay competitive? What does Massachusetts need to do in an era when it's easier than ever for people to locate anywhere to keep them here?
Well, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is East-West Rail. If there's one thing that marks your 8 years in the Senate, it is your tenacity with this concept, advancing the concept that if there was legitimate passenger rail service that would link essentially Pittsfield to Boston, that would be a game changer in terms of a number of things. Just like you said, if you got a laptop, you can almost work from anywhere. So why not work in a region that does not have exactly the high rental rates, the high cost of living, the crushing and crippling traffic issues? Why not live someplace else? And that rail system would accommodate a lot of people to do something like that. I was talking to my buddies at Smoky Joe's, a little plug here, and they were saying, wouldn't it be remarkable, for instance, if there was part of that East-West Rail was a special Fenway service, so that it could accommodate people from Western Massachusetts to go to a Sox game, and you get back on the train because they've adjusted the schedule.
They do that at Foxborough. There's a commuter rail line that goes directly to Gillette Stadium and back, coordinated with the game time. So there's precedent.
So we need to do stuff like that.
And there's a Fenway stop on the commuter rail that you can see from the Mass Pike right when you drive by. So it's ready to go for us.
Right. But my whole point in this is that you took something that people essentially laughed at, and you really brought it as close as a state senator could bring it to that goal line. Can you tell us a little bit about what that years of work was like for you?
Well, I appreciate that, Mike. And a lot of people have been speaking about rail and have been partnering with us. We've just have a great community of legislators, advocates, business leaders that have also not taken no for an answer for a very, very, very long time. So certainly want to lift them up and celebrate that collective achievement. And I think part of it is not taking no for an answer. I was laughed out of a lot of rooms when I ran as a 28-year-old back in 2014 on this idea of connecting Western Mass and Eastern Mass by high-speed rail service. Now, the service may or may not be, a Japanese-style bullet train, but the idea that you could quickly and reliably and frequently make the trip back and forth would be a game changer for our region. It would be perhaps the single most transformative economic development and environmental project the state has ever undertaken. And a lot of people laughed it away and dismissed it as a pipe dream for a long, long time, including, by the way, a veto by the governor on the original idea and proposal. A couple of things that we just did is continue to keep it front and center with the public. So when decision makers, when interest groups inside the State House were opposed to it, we went around them by talking directly to people. And Mike, you were a big part of that. You continued to cover it.
It was a fascinating story.
You continued to give it oxygen. You continued to explain to readers and to viewers why it was so important. The other thing I think we did, and I learned this as we went, is in the beginning the project was very much viewed as something to do for Western Mass. It was like, oh, we need this because they got the big dig and we get this and we had to pay for the big dig and now it's our turn. And I think that's the wrong frame to think about the project, and I think that's the wrong frame to ask for support. What changed it for us was when there was a growing realization that this was an essential project for our entire state, that this was going to help Boston just as much as it was going to help Springfield or Pittsfield. And the reason for that is, number one, it would be a transformative environmental project, taking thousands of cars off the road and cleaning our air. It would be a transformative housing project, creating thousands of units of new housing all along the route. It would be a transformative traffic project by taking thousands of cars off the roads and clearing out rush hour. And it would be a transformative economic development opportunity, creating thousands and thousands of new, really high-paying jobs. And once we started presenting it that way, as something that everyone will benefit from, The Boston City Council came on board. The Boston Chamber of Commerce came on board. The Mass Competitive Partnership lent their support, which is a coalition of the largest business leaders in the state. We had environmental groups supporting. We had legislators and mayors and local officials all up and down the more than 100-mile corridor, advocating and pushing for the project. And that's when it really started to build incredible momentum.
So what is the state right now for the project? I know that federal monies have been delivered to the Commonwealth. Am I right there? Or they've been earmarked, right?
A bipartisan federal infrastructure bill has passed, and we give a lot of credit to Chairman Neal and Chairman McGovern as well for really making that happen and making sure that intercity rail was a big part of that bill. So that legislation has passed. There are still some details that need to be sorted out. The Department of Transportation has to issue implementing guidance. There needs to be a kind of notice posted for the grants. So there are some steps left to unlock that money and start to get it flowing into the states. But the other question that we're now trying to sort out, and that will be a decision point for the new governor and for the new legislature in January, is what vehicle do we use to get the federal money into the state and get the shovels in the ground? The Baker administration has advised creating a rail authority, a new authority, to receive the funds, to issue requests for grants, to do the procurement, to do the bonding for the long-term capital investments, to operate the railroad, to issue the tickets. I mean, if you think about it, there's a lot to it. And so we're exploring that now. This commission was created, this Western Mass Rail Commission, to basically look at all this and make recommendations to the legislature about legally how to set that up. And the deadline for that is March. So that's coming. I mean, that's not very far away. So we're at this really critical moment for the project because it's no longer an abstract idea. Now it has moved from sort of abstract idea to the first phases of a real implementation and execution plan. And so there needs to be decisions made about how to move that federal money into the state. There needs to be decisions made about how that money will be housed and supervised and how the project will be managed. And there needs to be legislation passed, potentially legislation passed to set this authority up, if that's what the legislature decides they want to do or what the Rail Commission decides they want to do. So there's a lot happening, and I think the next year or so is going to be really, really critical to seeing whether the project truly moves forward and has a liftoff or not.
So is there any indication from the incoming Healy administration that this is going to be a priority?
Well, they certainly, Governor-elect Healy certainly during the campaign made it a very big priority, and had publicly announced the creation of a Western Mass Rail czar, and it was in her convention speech, it was in her announcement, so she talked about it frequently, and so there's every reason to believe and to hope that it will be a big part of their agenda in the coming months and of course in the coming 4 years. So
how are you feeling? I mean,
feel great, yeah.
You've had this, it's more than a job, it's public service for the last 8 years. Naturally, everyone wants to know what you're going to be doing, Senator. So I'm going to ask you, and you can tell me whatever answer you want to tell me. What are you going to be doing? I know you're going to be teaching at UMass. Am I right there?
Yeah, teaching a class. Yeah, I've done that before. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy being around young people, and especially the just energy of a college campus and working with students. So
yes, so you're still in your 30s. You are a young person.
I guess it's all relative, but I'll be doing that, and then no announcement beyond that. I've enjoyed the kind of slower pace right now, just spending time with my family.
Sure.
We've got a vacation that we're going to be taking soon, so there'll be an announcement soon enough, but nothing to announce just yet.
Okay. I'm thinking you should be up for that rail czar job, frankly. I mean, if there's a guy who could actually understand every aspect of this legislation and every aspect of this project, it would be you.
No, well, I appreciate you saying that, but not my decision to make one way or the other. So, nice try. But I'll
Okay,
stay
I'm
out of
doing my best here, folks. I'm doing my best. Geneva Convention doesn't allow me to torture him, so we're doing the best we can here. So looking back, were there elements of frustration as well as accomplishment in dealing with the bureaucracy of the state, with dealing with how the legislature, how quickly that they move or they don't move?
Of course. I mean, of course, there are elements of frustration. Anytime you're doing any kind of work that's worth doing, that's fast-paced, and that involves, a lot of moving pieces, there's going to be some elements of frustration. But, there's been really a lot of great joy and great accomplishment as well. And, all of it is part of a process. And, each person is a small part of that process. I was one of 40 working with an incredible group of colleagues who I had the chance to say farewell to earlier this week. We were one half of a legislative branch that included 160 great colleagues in the House, which is 1/3 of 3 branches of government that includes the governor and their administration, and of course the courts, and then of course local partners, mayors, city councilors, boards of selectmen across the state, and then we of course work very closely with our federal partners as well on so many different initiatives and efforts. So I liken it to like a big class project or group project in school where it's you're making remember the days of like the science fair and
Sure.
you're working on a diorama and one person's painting the little back and another person has the little figurine they're putting in and another person is sort of typing up the little signage, and it all kind of comes together after a lot of fits and starts
Sure.
and ups and downs. So
Do you have anything that you would like to see happen in the next year legislatively? Are there things that you've left that are pending that you're hoping move forward? Besides, of course, the rail issue, are there other bits of legislation that you're very concerned about?
There's a lot. There's a lot pending. I mean, I had filed over 60 pieces of legislation, give or take, every session, and of course, a fraction of those become law.
Right.
But I think it's more about continued momentum on things that I think have started or are germinating right now. We have immense potential in Western Mass around advanced manufacturing, precision machining, photonics. There's severe skill gaps there and worker shortages. We have great community colleges. We have great training institutes all around our region. We've got to get them more resources, more support so that they can continue to champion voc ed. The opioid crisis, after a lot of really good progress, we've gone backwards since COVID, and the numbers, unfortunately, are now back on an upswing. And we've got to continue to stay vigilant on substance abuse issues and the opioid crisis. I'd love to continue to see continued implementation of the Student Opportunity Act. And all the work we've done to help improve the Chapter 70 formula and help get more aid and support to schools. I mean, I could keep going, but another kind of zooming out big question that we're all going to be grappling with, I think, in the coming years is the future of work. Mm-hmm. I co-chaired an effort, a really fascinating dive into what is the workforce and the workplace of the future going to look like. And how does state government need to prepare and adapt for that future? So, we're going to have to be thinking about hybrid work, remote work. What do you do about broadband service when so many people are using their homes as office spaces? There's a growing trend around independent contracting and quote-unquote gig work. Often it comes without health insurance, without disability protections, without life insurance. How do we make sure that those workers are protected? These are big questions that get to the kind of heart and they get to the beams and timbers of our economy, right? The structure of work, the structure of benefits, the structure of employment. So I think just really thinking about that and thinking about the changes that we see all around us and how rapid they are. How do we stay adaptable and nimble in that kind of an environment?
And one of the spin-offs of that discussion is then for instance, land use and real estate, because of COVID, because of people working remotely or hybridly, office space, downtown areas are changing. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens to this property. Are we going to see more of it converted to housing? Do we see a resurgence in retail? There's all sorts of ancillary issues that go with what you're just saying about defining work at this time in our lives.
They're fascinating questions, and they're high-stakes questions. I mean, you and I are sitting right now in downtown Springfield. You have several high-rise office buildings that used to be filled with people coming in and out 9 to 5. Many still are. Many still work that way, but a lot of people increasingly aren't. So how do we keep downtowns vibrant? How do we think about office space? How do we think about the economies that surround those office buildings, the dry cleaners, the coffee shops, the lunch places, the lunch counters? You've seen this in a profound way, and it happened very fast. I mean, there were trends in this direction around remote work. If you remember, I filed that bill back in 2019 about an incentive for remote work in Western Mass, and the whole world went into a remote work experiment.
Yes, absolutely.
So we've been thinking about this stuff for a while, but we're going to need thoughtful strategy around that. Something else that's increasingly giving me pause and alarm, Mike, is the growing incidence of hate crimes and bigotry and just vitriol in our discourse. There's growing rates of anti-Semitism. There's growing rates of anti-Asian bias, threats against black people, Latino people, LGBTQ is going up and up, and this is a big problem. And it's a deeper social challenge that is being exacerbated by social media and other things, and that's also something I'd like to maybe spend some time really looking at a bit, now that I have a little bit more free time.
Well, you're absolutely, I mean, every statistic, every story that I see, you're absolutely right. There's increases in hate crime that, it's very disconcerting, because we like to think that we're progressing and advancing and evolving toward the positive, and yet there's been a lot of things that recently sort of don't support that, unfortunately. So, well, sir, it's been a pleasure talking with you today. It's been a pleasure talking to you to the last 8 years, and I'm hoping that in the future we can talk as well. We don't have to do it with a cigar and a drink, but nonetheless,
we'll meet up at Smokey Joe's.
There we go. But the bottom line is you're leaving the Senate at a very interesting time, and I'm hoping that your future is going to remain as interesting as the last 8 years has been.
I appreciate that, Mike, and
My
good
pleasure.
luck to you too.
Oh, well,
transitions
thanks.
all around.
Oh, don't worry, I got a lot to do here.
I bet.
Steve is going to employ me a lot more. I can tell you that.
I love it,
folks. You've been watching another edition of Government Matters here on Focus Springfield. My name is Mike Dobbs, and thank you for joining us.